I'm Captain Amelia Shanks, 29 years old. I came from a middle-class family with no military ties and earned my commission the hard way, through discipline, deployment, and more nights in a command post than I can count. For years, I did what every good officer does: showed up, kept my standards high, and helped my husband's family whenever they needed a hand. I reviewed forms, rewrote scholarship essays, and never pulled rank, because family comes first, right? Then one Thanksgiving, my brother-in-law mock saluted me in front of everyone, turning my career into a punchline. The next time he saw me, I was behind the desk at his promotion review. That was the day he learned what respect really costs. Ever been talked down to by someone you helped rise? Undervalued? Humiliated by people who should have known better? Tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground after being disrespected, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about setting boundaries and reclaiming your worth. What came next changed everything. I stood at my desk that Tuesday morning, adjusting the silver bars on my Air Force Service dress uniform. Captain Amelia Shanks, 03, 29 years old, and already tired of explaining myself to people who should know better. The coffee in my hand was lukewarm, but I drank it anyway. Outside my office window at Peterson Air Force Base, the Colorado sky stretched clean and blue, the kind of morning that made you forget for a moment that half your life was spent justifying your authority to people who'd never worn the uniform. My husband Ethan called it my poker face morning routine. Put on the uniform, smooth down anything that might reveal doubt, walk into a world that expected you to be twice as good for half the recognition. He understood, mostly. He'd grown up military adjacent, knew the language, respected the structure. But his brother Mark, that was a different story entirely. Mark Shanks was 31, 2 years older than Ethan, and a technical sergeant in the Army. E6. He'd enlisted at 18, worked his way up through sheer determination and the kind of charisma that made people overlook his rough edges. At family dinners, he was the center of attention. Loud, confident, quick with a joke. The kind of man who filled a room and expected everyone to adjust to his presence. I'd met him at our engagement party 7 years ago. He'd shown up in civilian clothes, shook my hand too hard, and said, "So you're the one stealing my little brother into officer country." Everyone laughed. I smiled and let it go. That was my first mistake, thinking it was harmless. Ethan and I got married 6 months later. Small ceremony, military chapel, nothing fancy. Mark gave a toast that started sincere and ended with him joking about how I'd probably make Ethan salute me at home. More laughter. I'd learned by then that the Shanks family communicated through humor, often at someone else's expense. If you couldn't take a joke, you didn't belong. But I'd spent 3 years deployed overseas by that point. I'd managed airfield operations in hostile territory, coordinated logistics for fighter squadrons, earned my captain's bars through competence and countless sleepless nights. I wasn't delicate. I just didn't find disrespect particularly funny. The early years were manageable. Mark lived 4 states away, stationed at Fort Hood. We saw him at holidays, maybe twice a year. He'd ask about my work with what seemed like genuine interest, and I'd tell him about training exercises, deployment cycles, the bureaucratic maze of military life. He'd nod, share stories about his own unit, and we'd find common ground in our shared frustration with Army-Air Force rivalry jokes. Then his wife Anna got pregnant with their daughter Emily, and suddenly family became more central. More visits, more phone calls, more opportunities for the small frictions to accumulate. Anna struggled with the medical paperwork for her high-risk pregnancy. The military healthcare system is a beast even for those of us who navigate it daily. She called me one evening, overwhelmed and crying, and I walked her through every form, every office she needed to contact, every regulation she could cite if someone gave her trouble. "Thank you," she'd said, voice thick with relief. "I don't know what I would have done." "That's what family does," I'd told her. I meant it. Mark never acknowledged it. Not directly. But at the next barbecue, he made a comment about officer privilege and how nice it must be to have desk job connections. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table. I stayed quiet. When Emily was 16 and applying for college scholarships, Anna asked if I'd look at her essay. The girl was smart, thoughtful, wanted to study engineering. Her writing was solid but unfocused. I spent a weekend helping her sharpen it, restructure her arguments, find her authentic voice. She got the scholarship. Anna sent flowers. Mark sent a text, "Thanks for the help." Emily's thrilled. No mention of it at Thanksgiving. But when someone asked Emily about her scholarship, Mark jumped in with the story, framing it as if he'd been the one to guide her through the process. I watched him rewrite the narrative in real time, and I understood something fundamental. Mark needed to be the hero of every story. And I was just furniture in his version. "You're quiet tonight," Ethan said on the drive home that evening. "Just tired." He doesn't mean anything by it, you know. That's just how he is. I looked out the window at the dark highway, streetlights blurring past. I know. But I didn't know. Not really. Because there's a difference between harmless teasing and systematic erasure. Between family banter and calculated disrespect. I'd given Mark's family my time, my expertise, my patience. I'd helped them navigate systems I'd spent years mastering. And in return, I got jokes about my so-called officer lifestyle and implications that my rank was somehow decorative. At work, my authority was unquestioned. I led a team of 30 airmen, managed multi-million-dollar operations, briefed colonels and generals without hesitation. My performance reviews were immaculate. My subordinates respected me because I respected them, because I held myself to the same standards I demanded from them, because leadership isn't about the bars on your collar, it's about the gap between what you say and what you do. But at Shank's family gatherings, I was Captain Fancy. Mark's nickname, delivered with a grin that dared me to take offense. The first time he used it, I'd laughed it off. The 10th time, I'd stopped laughing. By the 20th, I'd stopped responding at all. "You should say something," my mentor Colonel Rhodes told me over coffee one afternoon. She was 06, 50-something, with steel gray hair and the kind of presence that made junior officers straighten their spines involuntarily. Family or not, respect is respect. It's complicated. It's always complicated. That's why most people choose silence. She stirred her coffee slowly, considering. But silence has a cost too. Just make sure you're willing to pay it. I thought about that conversation for weeks. The cost of silence. The cost of speaking up. The cost of being a woman in uniform who refused to make herself smaller to accommodate someone else's ego. Mark's jokes continued. Desk General became another favorite. At a summer cookout, he mock-saluted me in front of Ethan's parents, his voice dripping with theatrical deference. "Permission to grab another beer, ma'am?" Everyone laughed. Even Ethan, though his laugh was uncomfortable, apologetic. I excused myself, went inside to help with dishes that didn't need helping, and stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. 30 years old, wearing a sundress and pretending not to care that my brother-in-law had just reduced my rank to a punchline. When I came back outside, Mark was holding court, telling deployment stories that grew more dramatic with each beer. I sat next to Ethan, his hand finding mine automatically, and I realized something that made my chest tight. His family would always choose Mark's comfort over my dignity. Not because they were cruel, but because maintaining peace was easier than confronting imbalance. That night, lying in bed, Ethan asked, "Are you okay?" "Fine." "You don't seem fine." I turned to face him in the darkness. "Your brother doesn't respect me." "He's just joking." "I know. Everyone keeps saying that." I sat up, pulled my knees to my chest. "But jokes reveal truth, Ethan. He thinks my rank is costume jewelry. He thinks I'm playing soldier while he does the real work. That's not it is." My voice was steady, factual. "And your family lets him because correcting him would be uncomfortable. So instead, I'm supposed to keep smiling and pretending it doesn't matter." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, "I don't know how to fix this." "Neither do I." But I did know one thing. I was done making myself smaller. Done accepting disrespect wrapped in humor. Done being generous with people who couldn't be bothered to see me clearly. I just didn't know yet that the universe was about to hand me an opportunity I'd never asked for, and a choice that would define everything that came after. The shift happened gradually, then all at once. Mark started talking about commissioning, officer training school, becoming a lieutenant. It came up at a birthday dinner for Ethan's mother, Mark's voice carrying across the table with that familiar confidence. Applied for OTS last month, he announced, pausing for effect. Panel reviews are coming up. Figure it's time to make the jump. His wife Anna beamed. Isn't that wonderful? Mark's always been a natural leader. That's fantastic, I said, and I meant it. Commissioning is competitive, especially from the enlisted ranks. It requires education, leadership evaluations, a proven track record. The OTS program is solid. When do you hear back? Few months. But I've got a good feeling. He leaned back in his chair, grin widening. Guess I'll outrank you soon enough, Captain Fancy. The table went quiet for half a heartbeat. Then Ethan's father laughed, breaking the tension, and conversation resumed. I took a sip of water, set the glass down carefully, and said nothing. Because what was there to say? That commissioning took more than confidence? That being a technical sergeant didn't automatically translate to officer material? That leadership was about service, not status? All of that would sound defensive. Bitter. Small. So I smiled and changed the subject, and Mark went back to holding court, and I went back to being furniture in his story. But something had shifted. The jokes weren't just jokes anymore. They were assertions. Declarations of an intention to surpass me, to prove something I'd never challenged. Mark wasn't just dismissive of my rank, he was threatened by it. And that changed everything. He's nervous, Ethan said later, always trying to translate his brother's behavior into something more palatable. This is a big step for him. The teasing is just his way of processing. Processing what? That you're already what he's trying to become. I looked at my husband, this good man who loved his brother and loved me and couldn't reconcile the space between us. Then he should try respecting it. At work, I mentioned Mark's application to no one. It wasn't relevant. My job was to evaluate airmen under my command, to maintain operational readiness, to lead with integrity. What my brother-in-law chose to pursue was his business. But I did start noticing things. The way Mark talked about his mentor, Major Dan Lively, with an almost worshipful reverence. Real leader, Mark would say. Combat veteran. Knows how to command respect. The implication was clear, unlike the paper-pushing academy types. Unlike me. I looked up Major Lively out of curiosity. His file was accessible through joint service databases. Combat infantry badge, multiple deployments, solid performance reviews. Also, 2 equal opportunity complaints filed against him, both dismissed for lack of evidence. A reputation for old-school leadership that skirted the edge of acceptable. The kind of officer who inspired fierce loyalty in some and quiet resentment in others. He tells it like it is, Mark said at another gathering. Doesn't buy into all the political correctness. Just straight talk about what it takes to lead soldiers. Anna nodded enthusiastically. He's been such a good influence. Really showing Mark what leadership looks like. I thought about my own mentor, Colonel Rhodes, who'd taught me that leadership meant elevating others, not elevating yourself at their expense. That command presence came from competence and care, not bravado and intimidation. That the best officers were the ones who remembered what it meant to be the lowest-ranking person in the room. But I said none of this. I was learning that with Mark's family, silence wasn't consent, it was survival. The teasing escalated. At a 4th of July barbecue, Mark started calling me Desk General, emphasizing it every time he addressed me. Desk General, can you pass the potato salad? Hey Desk General, what's the Air Force view on burgers versus hot dogs? Ethan's mother laughed. Oh Mark, you're terrible. Just giving her a hard time. She knows I'm kidding. But I didn't know that. Because his eyes held something harder than humor, something that looked like resentment wrapped in a smile. He wanted me to react, to defend myself, to give him an excuse to escalate further. So I didn't. I passed the potato salad and kept my face neutral and felt the cost of silence accumulating like compound interest. You're handling this well, Colonel Rhodes told me at our next coffee meeting. She had a way of seeing through the professional mask I wore at work. But don't confuse endurance with resolution. Meaning eventually, something will break. Either his behavior or your tolerance. Better to control which one. I can't control him. No. but you can control your boundaries. And you can stop protecting people from the consequences of their choices. I thought about that. About how I'd spent years making myself palatable, manageable, non-threatening. About how that had earned me exactly nothing except more mockery. Mark posted on social media constantly now. Photos in uniform, captions about the OTS grind, and officer country, here I come. Comments flooded in, supportive and congratulatory. I didn't like or comment. When Anna asked why I wasn't following his journey, I said I didn't use social media much. That's too bad, she said, disappointed. He's really excited about this. It would mean a lot if you showed some support. I'd written his wife's housing paperwork. I'd coached his daughter's scholarship essay. I'd been polite through years of disrespect. But sure, I wasn't supportive enough. I'm sure he'll do great, I said. The reality was more complicated. Commissioning boards evaluated the whole person, leadership potential, education, performance reviews, recommendations. Mark had the confidence, but confidence alone didn't make an officer. I'd seen plenty of cocky NCOs flame out in OTS because they couldn't adapt to the different demands of commission service. But that wasn't my concern. My job was to lead my own team, to maintain my own standards, to keep proving that I belonged in rooms where people questioned my presence. At work, my squadron commander asked me to sit on the quarterly OTS review board. It was standard for captains with my experience. We evaluated applications, interviewed candidates, made recommendations to the wing commander. I'd done it twice before. Professional responsibility, nothing complicated. You'll be reviewing Army candidates too this cycle, he said. Joint board. The usual protocol applies. I nodded, took the assignment folder, and went back to my office. It wasn't until that evening, going through the candidate list, that I saw his name, TSGD Mark A. Shanks, U.S. Army, applying for officer training school. My hands went still on the paper. The universe, apparently, had a sense of irony so sharp it could cut. I sat there for a long time, office door closed, reading through his application packet. It was thorough, professionally written, supported by strong performance reviews from his unit. His mentor, Major Lively, had written a glowing recommendation. On paper, Mark looked like exactly the kind of NCO the program was designed for. But I knew things the paper didn't show. I knew his arrogance, his dismissiveness, his inability to respect authority he didn't personally admire. I knew he viewed commissioning as a status upgrade rather than a service commitment. And I knew that I was now in a position to evaluate him. I picked up the phone, called Colonel Rhodes. I have a situation. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, what are you going to do? I don't know. Yes, you do. You're going to do your job. You're going to evaluate him the same way you'd evaluate any other candidate. You're going to be fair, professional, and impartial. What if fair isn't what he expects? Then he'll learn something important about the difference between confidence and competence. I hung up, stared at Mark's application packet, and made a decision. I would disclose the family connection to the board chair. I would recuse myself if there was any appearance of impropriety. And I would, above all, maintain the integrity that had defined my entire career. Mark had spent years dismissing my rank, my authority, my right to wear this uniform. Now he wanted to join me in it. The irony was exquisite. And terrifying. Because I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. And sometimes, those looked exactly the same. Thanksgiving came like a storm I could see building on the horizon. Ethan's parents hosted, the same as every year. The house smelled like turkey and tension, though only I seemed to notice the second ingredient. We arrived at 1500 hours, arms full of dishes I'd prepared the night before. Anna met us at the door, her hug tight and enthusiastic. The soon-to-be officer's family, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Mark appeared behind her, grin wide. He'd been drinking already. I could tell by the extra brightness in his eyes, the looseness in his shoulders. Captain Fancy. Glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, I said, keeping my voice light. Ethan's parents welcomed us into the living room, where Mark's daughter Emily sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, smiled genuinely. Hi, Aunt Amelia. Hey, Em. How's school? Good. Engineering program's kicking my butt, but I love it. That's the right attitude. Mark interjected, she gets her work ethic from her old man. I didn't point out that I'd spent hours helping her develop the study habits that were serving her now. That wasn't the point of today. The point was to survive dinner without incident. But survival requires both parties to want peace, and Mark was in a mood. The warning signs were there during appetizers. He kept refilling his glass, talking louder, interrupting more. Major Lively had apparently told him his OTS packet was the strongest he'd seen in years. The interview was a formality. He was basically already in. Must be nice to have that kind of confidence, Ethan's father said, proud. Just being realistic, Pops. I know what I bring to the table. I focused on the cheese plate, selecting crackers with careful precision. Dinner was chaos in the way large family meals always are, overlapping conversations, past dishes, laughter that came in waves. I sat between Ethan and Emily, grateful for the buffer. Mark held court at the other end of the table, telling deployment stories that grew more heroic with each glass of wine. I was managing, counting down to the moment we could politely leave. And then Mark raised his glass. I want to make a toast, he announced, standing up slightly unsteadily. Everyone quieted, turned to listen. To family, to service, and to finally joining the officer ranks. His eyes found mine across the table. Captain Amelia here has been showing me the ropes, teaching me all about that officer lifestyle. Murmurs of approval, glasses raising. Won't be long now, he continued, grin sharpening, before I outrank her. From technical sergeant to second lieutenant. Funny how that works. Nervous laughter rippled around the table. Anna touched his arm. Mark, but he was committed now, fueled by alcohol and audience. He raised his hand in a mock salute, voice dripping with exaggerated deference. Yes, ma'am, Captain Amelia, reporting for dish duty. The laughter that followed was real. Loud. Ethan's father nearly choked on his wine. Even Ethan, God help him, chuckled awkwardly, caught between loyalty and discomfort. I sat very still, fork poised above my plate. The room tilted slightly, not from any physical imbalance, but from the sudden clarity of my position. These people, my family by marriage, found my humiliation entertaining. They were laughing because Mark had successfully reduced my rank, my career, my entire professional identity to a punchline. The silence that followed was mine. I set down my fork with careful precision, pushed back my chair, and stood. Every eye tracked to me, laughter dying in awkward stages. Excuse me, I said quietly. I need some air. I walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at myself in the mirror. 30 years old, wearing civilian clothes over a backbone forged in service. My face was calm. Professional. Blink. Behind the door, I heard muted conversation resume, lower now, uncertain. I took 3 deep breaths, straightened my shoulders, and made a choice. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me break. I was simply going to remember. When I returned to the table, Mark was telling another story, voice bright with the relief of tension past. I took my seat, finished my meal in silence, and declined dessert. Ethan kept glancing at me, his worry a palpable presence, but I just smiled and shook my head. Later, his hand found mine under the table, squeezed gently. I squeezed back, but didn't look at him. We left at 2000 hours, earlier than usual. In the car, Ethan finally spoke. I'm sorry. For what? For laughing. For not saying something. For he gripped the steering wheel tighter. I should have defended you. Yes, I agreed simply. You should have. He didn't mean don't. My voice cut clean through the familiar excuse. Don't tell me what he meant. I know exactly what he meant. The question is whether you do. We drove the rest of the way in silence. At home, Ethan tried again to apologize, to explain, to smooth things over. I listened without interrupting, then went to change into comfortable clothes. When I came back out, he was sitting on the couch, head in his hands. I love him, he said. He's my brother. I know. But that doesn't excuse. No, I agreed. It doesn't. He looked up at me, searching for something, forgiveness, maybe, or permission to feel torn. I had neither to give. So I just sat next to him, let him lean against me, and stared at the dark window reflecting us back to ourselves. The weekend passed. I went to work Monday morning, put on my uniform, and walked into a world where my rank meant something. Where people saluted and meant it, where my authority was respected because I'd earned it through competence and care. At my desk, I found an email from Colonel Rhodes. Board meeting next Thursday, 0900. Candidate interviews start at 1100. Review packets attached. I opened the attachments methodically. 15 candidates total. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. All NCOs seeking commissions. All hoping to trade enlisted rank for officer responsibilities. Mark's packet was 7th in the stack. I read it carefully, professionally, looking for what the paper showed and what it hid. His performance reviews were strong, no denying that. He'd led soldiers effectively, managed complex logistics, earned respect from his chain of command. His education was adequate, bachelor's degree in business management, completed while enlisted. His physical fitness scores were excellent. His recommendation letters glowed with praise. On paper, TSGT Mark Shanks was a strong candidate. But the paper didn't show his character. It didn't show how he treated people he perceived as beneath him. It didn't show his need to dominate every room he entered. It didn't show the casual cruelty he disguised as humor. And I couldn't put any of that in my evaluation without it looking personal. So I wouldn't. I would simply do my job. Ask fair questions. Evaluate his responses. Let his own words reveal what the paper hid. Because the thing about interviews is this: they're designed to apply pressure, to see how people respond when challenged, when uncertain, when forced to think beyond rehearsed answers. Officers needed to handle pressure with grace and humility. They needed to admit what they didn't know, to show willingness to learn, to demonstrate that leadership meant service, not status. Mark would either rise to that standard or he wouldn't. And I would simply bear witness. I sent an email to the board chair, Colonel Martinez from the Army. Candidate Shanks is my brother-in-law. Disclosing family connection per protocol. Available to recuse if necessary. His response came within an hour. Noted. Given your professional standing and the fact that you'll be one of 5 board members, I don't see grounds for recusal unless you feel there's a conflict of interest. Your objectivity is trusted. So it was decided. I would stay. I would evaluate him alongside the others. And whatever happened next would happen according to regulations, standards, and the unflinching weight of professional judgment. That night, Ethan asked how my day was. Fine, I said. Just fine. I looked at him across the dinner table we'd picked out together, in the home we'd built together, and realized that some truths created chasms too wide to bridge with explanations. Mark's OTS interview is next week. Ethan brightened. That's great. He's been so nervous. I'm on the review board. The brightness dimmed. Understanding dawned slowly, like sunrise through thick clouds. Oh, yeah. Are you going to treat him exactly like every other candidate? Ethan nodded slowly. That's fair. It's the only option. He reached across the table, took my hand. This is complicated. It's only complicated if I make it complicated. If I do my job, it's simple. But we both knew nothing about this was simple. Because in 6 days, Mark would walk into that interview room expecting validation, expecting to be celebrated, expecting the universe to confirm what he already believed about himself. And I would be sitting there, wearing my captain's bars, holding a clipboard, and waiting to see if he understood the difference between commanding respect and demanding it. The irony was still exquisite. But now it was also inevitable. The days before the board meeting passed in a strange, suspended way, time moving forward while I seemed to be standing still, watching it go. I went through my normal routines, morning runs, team briefings, paperwork, evening calls with Ethan that felt stilted and careful. Neither of us mentioned Mark. Neither of us mentioned the interview. We just moved around the subject like furniture in a dark room, knowing it was there, trying not to collide with it. At work, I prepared meticulously. I reviewed every candidate packet twice, made notes on questions to explore, calibrated my expectations against the OTS standards I'd seen applied in previous boards. This wasn't my first evaluation panel, but it was the first one where personal history intersected with professional duty in a way that made my chest feel tight. "You're overthinking this," Colonel Rhodes said when I stopped by her office Wednesday afternoon. She didn't look up from the report she was signing, just kept writing in that decisive way she had. "Treat him like any other candidate. Ask your questions. Make your assessment. Done. What if I'm too hard on him? What if you're too easy?" She finally looked up, her gray eyes sharp. "Amelia, you didn't create this situation. He did, with years of disrespect and arrogance. Your job now is to evaluate whether he's officer material. Not whether he's a good brother-in-law or a decent guy at barbecues. Whether he has the humility, adaptability, and judgment to lead as a commissioned officer. And if he doesn't, then the board will see it. Not just you, all 5 of you. That's why we use panels instead of individual evaluators. Trust the process. Trust yourself." I left her office feeling marginally more settled, but the weight remained. That night, I laid out my service dress uniform, checked every detail twice. Creases sharp, ribbons aligned, shoes polished until they reflected the ceiling light. The ritual was calming, uniform as armor, precision as meditation. Ethan watched from the bedroom doorway. "You okay?" "Fine." "You don't seem fine." I turned to face him, hands still smoothing invisible wrinkles from my jacket. "I'm preparing to evaluate your brother for officer training." "How should I seem?" He winced. "I know this is hard." "Do you?" The question came out sharper than I intended. I softened my voice. "I'm sorry. I just need to focus right now." He nodded, retreated. I heard the television click on in the living room, the low murmur of some sitcom laugh track. Normal evening sounds in a house that felt anything but normal. Thursday morning arrived cold and clear. I drove to the Joint Base Administrative Building where the board convened, arriving at 0800 hours, early enough to settle in, late enough to avoid looking anxious. The room was standard military bureaucratic, long conference table, flags in the corner, fluorescent lighting that made everything slightly institutional. Colonel Martinez was already there, army dress uniform immaculate, reading through packets. He looked up when I entered, nodded. "Captain Shanks." "Sir. Ready for today?" "Yes, sir." The other board members trickled in over the next 30 minutes. Commander Ellis from the Navy, Captain Okoye from the Marines, and Major Brennan from the Air Force. We exchanged greetings, settled into our seats, and reviewed the day's schedule. 15 candidates, 20 minutes each, with 10-minute gaps for discussion. We'd break for lunch at 1200 hours, resume at 1300, finish by 1600. Standard protocol, Colonel Martinez reminded us. We rotate who leads questions. Keep it professional, keep it probing. We're looking for leadership potential, adaptability, judgment under pressure. Not just technical confidence, they've already proven that. We need to see if they can transition from managing tasks to leading people. We all nodded. I'd heard this speech before. It never got less important. Mark's interview was scheduled for 13:30 hours, 7th out of 15. The morning crawled by. We interviewed an Army Staff Sergeant who was nervous but thoughtful, answering questions with careful precision. A Navy Petty Officer who had clearly over-rehearsed, his answers too polished to reveal real substance. An Air Force Tech Sergeant who impressed us all with her mature understanding of what leadership required. Each interview followed the same pattern: introductions, opening questions about their motivation for commissioning, deeper exploration of their leadership philosophy, scenario-based questions to test judgment. Then we'd thank them, they'd leave, and we'd spend 10 minutes debating their strengths and weaknesses, comparing them to the standard. Lunch came and went. I barely tasted the sandwich I'd brought. At 13:25 hours, Colonel Martinez announced, next candidate, Technical Sergeant Mark Shanks, U.S. Army. My pulse kicked up despite my best efforts. Commander Ellis glanced at me. He knew about the family connection from the pre-board briefing, but said nothing. We all arranged our papers, settled into professional neutrality, and waited. At precisely 13:30 hours, the door opened. Mark walked in wearing Army dress uniform, spine straight, shoulders back. He looked sharp, professional, confident. His eyes swept the panel, landing briefly on each of us before moving to the next. When they reached me, his entire body froze mid-stride. The pause was maybe 2 seconds. It felt eternal. His face cycled through expressions too fast to name: confusion, recognition, shock, something that might have been anger or fear or both. His mouth opened slightly, closed. Opened again. "Ma'am," he said finally, voice rough. He snapped a salute, held it too long, lowered it with none of his usual fluid grace. At ease, Sergeant Shanks, Colonel Martinez said from the head of the table. "Please have a seat." Mark sat, but his eyes kept darting to me. The confidence that usually radiated from him like heat had simply vanished, replaced by something raw and uncertain. "Let's begin," Colonel Martinez continued smoothly. "Sergeant Shanks, can you tell us why you're interested in commissioning?" Mark's answer was rehearsed, delivered in that voice I'd heard him use at family dinners, authoritative, certain, designed to command a room. "Sir, I've been leading soldiers for over a decade. I believe my experience and dedication position me to serve more effectively as a commissioned officer. I want to operate at a higher strategic level to impact mission planning and unit development in ways my current rank doesn't allow." It was a solid answer. Textbook, even. But it revealed nothing. Commander Ellis asked the next question: "What do you believe is the fundamental difference between being an NCO and being an officer?" "Authority level, sir. Officers set policy, NCOs execute it." There was a pause. Captain Okoye leaned forward. "Is that all?" "Just authority." Mark hesitated, sensing the trap but unable to see its shape. "Officers have broader responsibility. Different scope." "But what about the nature of leadership itself?" Okoye pressed. "How does leading as an officer differ from leading as an NCO?" Officers have more people under them. Bigger picture perspective." It was the wrong answer. We all heard it. Leadership isn't about quantity of subordinates or breadth of view. It's about philosophy, about how you understand your relationship to power and service. Major Brennan jumped in. "Tell us about a time you had to admit you were wrong to someone you led. How did you handle it?" Mark's pause stretched longer this time. "I can't think of a specific example. I mean, I make adjustments based on feedback, but I generally trust my judgment in the moment." Strike two. Officers had to be capable of intellectual humility, of recognizing mistakes and learning from them. Admitting fallibility wasn't weakness, it was essential. I'd been quiet so far, letting others lead. But it was my turn in the rotation, and I had questions that needed answers. "Sergeant Shanks," I said, voice even and professional, "describe your leadership philosophy. What do you believe makes someone fit to command?" His eyes met mine. Something passed between us, recognition of all the dinners, all the jokes, all the casual disrespect that had led to this moment. He swallowed hard. "Competence," he said. "Confidence. Ability to make tough calls under pressure." "What about service?" "Ma'am? You listed qualities that benefit the leader: competence, confidence, decisiveness. What about qualities that benefit those being led? What do you owe the people under your command?" The room was very quiet. Mark opened his mouth, closed it. Started again. "Respect. Clear guidance. Fair treatment. And do you believe respect is something you demand or something you earn?" His jaw tightened. He knew I wasn't just asking about leadership theory. I was asking about us, about years of treating my rank like a costume, about assuming authority was something you claimed rather than something you demonstrated. "Both," he said finally. "The rank demands respect, but the person earns it. And if those two things come into conflict? If someone respects the rank but not the person wearing it?" Mark's face was flushed now. "Then the person needs to prove themselves worthy of the rank." I nodded slowly, made a note. Moved to my next question. "Tell us about your mentor, Major Lively. What has he taught you about leadership?" Mark's confidence returned slightly, on familiar ground. "Major Lively taught me that leadership is about strength. About not backing down, about demanding excellence. He doesn't tolerate weakness or excuses. Does he tolerate mistakes? He expects people to learn from them. Does he admit his own?" Hesitation. "I'm not sure I understand the question, ma'am. You said he doesn't tolerate weakness. Does that include his own fallibility, or just others?" Major Lively is an excellent officer. That's not an answer to my question. The rest of the panel was watching intently now. This wasn't hostile. It was pointed, designed to probe beneath surface-level responses. Mark was floundering, unable to articulate a leadership philosophy beyond strength and certainty. Colonel Martinez stepped in with scenario questions, how Mark would handle various difficult leadership situations. His answers were tactical, focused on control and decisiveness. He never once mentioned collaboration, mentorship, or the developmental aspects of leadership. 20 minutes passed like slow surgery. When Colonel Martinez finally thanked him and dismissed him, Mark stood, saluted, and walked out. His shoulders were stiff with something that looked like humiliation mixed with anger. The door closed. The five of us sat in silence for a moment. Then Major Brennan said quietly, "Well, that was revealing." We spent the full 10 minutes discussing Mark's interview, and then some. Colonel Martinez kept checking his watch, conscious of staying on schedule, but the conversation was necessary. Technically proficient, Commander Ellis said, flipping through Mark's packet. Performance reviews support that. His unit clearly values him as an NCO. But NCO competence doesn't automatically translate to officer potential, Captain Okoye countered. He showed no understanding of developmental leadership. Everything was about control and authority. Major Brennan nodded. The question about admitting mistakes, he couldn't even conceptualize it. That's concerning for someone who wants to lead at a higher level. I stayed quiet, letting them talk. This was important. Their assessments needed to be independent of my personal history. But eventually Colonel Martinez turned to me. "Captain Shanks, you were notably direct with your questions. Anything specific you want to flag?" I chose my words carefully. His leadership philosophy seems rooted in dominance rather than development. He views respect as something demanded by rank rather than earned through action. And his mentor relationship concerns me. Major Lively has a reputation for old-school, authoritarian leadership that doesn't align with current military values around inclusion and adaptability. "You know Major Lively?" Commander Ellis asked. "Only by reputation. But that reputation includes EO complaints and a leadership style that prioritizes obedience over growth." Colonel Martinez made notes. "So we're seeing a pattern. Candidate has absorbed a leadership model that may not serve him well as an officer." "More than that," Captain Okoye said. "He showed no intellectual humility. Couldn't articulate what he owes the people he leads, only what they owe him. That's a fundamental philosophical gap." We continued discussing for a few more minutes, but the assessment was clear. When we finally moved on to the next candidate, I felt both relief and a strange, hollow weight. The afternoon continued. More candidates, more interviews, more evaluations. Some impressive, some adequate, some clearly not ready. By 1600 hours, we'd completed all 15. Colonel Martinez called for final voting. We went through each candidate systematically, marking them as recommend, recommend with reservations, or do not recommend. When we reached Mark's name, there was a brief pause. Then one by one, we marked our votes. I waited until last, wanting to see the pattern before adding my assessment. 4 votes appeared on the tally sheet before mine. 2 do not recommend, 2 recommend with reservations. I marked do not recommend and added a note. Demonstrates insufficient leadership maturity for commissioning. Recommend reapplication after additional NCO leadership experience and mentorship focused on developmental leadership principles. The final tally, 3 do not recommend, 2 recommend with reservations. Not unanimous, but clear enough. Mark Shanks would not be accepted into OTS this cycle. Colonel Martinez reviewed the results, nodded. "We'll submit these to the wing commander by Friday. Candidates will be notified within 2 weeks." We gathered our materials, exchanged professional goodbyes. Commander Ellis caught me on the way out. That was uncomfortable, I imagine. It was necessary. "You maintained good boundaries. Professional throughout." "Thank you, sir." He studied me for a moment. "For what it's worth, I think you made the right call." He wasn't ready. I nodded, didn't trust myself to say more. Because the right call and the painful call were often the same thing, and understanding that didn't make it hurt less. I drove home in gathering darkness, my mind oddly blank. The decision was made. The board had spoken. In 2 weeks, Mark would receive a letter explaining that his application had been reviewed and not recommended for advancement. The letter wouldn't detail specific reasons, that was protocol. But he would know. Everyone would know. Ethan was waiting when I got home, anxiety written across his face. How did it go? I can't discuss board proceedings. Did he? Ethan started again. Is he going to be okay? That's not my concern. My concern was whether he met the standard for commissioning. And I met my husband's eyes. The board will submit its recommendations to the wing commander. Candidates will be notified in 2 weeks. But you were fair? The question landed like an accusation, and something in me finally cracked. Fair? I've been fair to your brother for 7 years. Fair while he mocked my rank, fair while he undermined my authority, fair while he treated my career like a joke. Today I was professional. I evaluated him by the same standard I apply to every candidate. And if that's not good enough, then maybe you need to ask yourself why you're more worried about his feelings than my integrity. Ethan stepped back as if I'd struck him. I didn't mean, I know what you meant. You meant, did I sabotage him because of our history? No, I didn't. I evaluated his responses, his leadership philosophy, his readiness. So did 4 other senior officers. And we all saw the same gaps. What gaps? I was too tired for this conversation, too tired to translate military assessment into family diplomacy. He's not ready. Maybe he will be someday, but not now. Because he made some jokes? Because he doesn't understand what leadership requires. We stood there in our kitchen, the distance between us feeling suddenly uncrossable. Ethan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was stressed. He's going to blame you. Probably. My parents are going to blame you. Probably that too. And you're okay with that? I thought about Colonel Rhodes asking me years ago about the cost of silence. About the compound interest of self-erasure. I'm okay with having done my job correctly. What your family chooses to believe is up to them. Ethan nodded slowly, but his expression was troubled. We moved around each other carefully that evening, polite and distant, both of us aware that something had shifted in our foundation. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about the moment Mark had walked into that room and seen me. The way his certainty had simply dissolved. I'd spent years watching him hold court, dominating every room with that aggressive charisma. And in one moment, faced with authority he couldn't dismiss or mock, he'd faltered. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired and sad and strangely free. Because I'd finally stopped making myself smaller to accommodate someone else's ego. I'd stood my ground in the most professional way possible, and the standing had been enough. The next morning, I went to work as usual. Filed the board report, attended meetings, led my team through a routine training exercise. Colonel Rhodes stopped by my office late afternoon. Board results submitted? Yes, ma'am. How are you holding up? I considered the question honestly. I'm okay. It was difficult, but it was right. She nodded. The difficult and the right are usually the same thing. That's why most people choose easy. I'm tired of easy. Good. Because easy doesn't build character, it just protects it from being tested. She turned to leave, then paused. You know there will be fallout. I know. And you're prepared for it? I have to be. She smiled slightly. Then you're already ahead of most people. After she left, I sat at my desk and looked at the photo I kept there, Ethan and me on our wedding day, young and hopeful, believing love could smooth over any rough edge. I still loved him. But I was learning that love without respect was just extended loneliness. 2 weeks. That's how long Mark had before he'd know officially. 2 weeks before the earthquake hit his confidence, before family dynamics shifted irrevocably, before consequences arrived like bills long overdue. I used those 2 weeks to prepare. I anticipated the phone calls, the accusations, the attempts to make me explain or apologize or somehow minimize what I'd done. I rehearsed responses in my head, calm, factual, refusing to be drawn into emotional manipulation. But I also did something else. I scheduled time with a therapist on base, someone who specialized in military family dynamics. Because I was learning that doing the right thing didn't exempt you from needing support through it. You're grieving, the therapist told me in our first session. Not the relationship with your brother-in-law. That was already damaged. You're grieving the family you thought you'd married into. The acceptance you believed you'd find. She was right. I'd spent years trying to earn belonging, not understanding that some people would never grant it no matter what I did. The board decision hadn't created that reality. It had just revealed it. The letter went out on a Tuesday. I knew because Colonel Martinez sent a courtesy notification to all board members. Candidate notifications dispatched 0900 hours, December 17th. My phone started ringing at 1000 hours. Ethan's mother first, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. I let it go to voicemail. Then Anna, crying, asking how I could do this to Mark, to their family. Voicemail. Then Ethan's father, disappointed and confused. Voicemail. Ethan called at 1100 hours, his voice strained. He knows. Okay. Amelia, he's devastated. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? The question was bitter, unlike Ethan. Yes. I'm sorry he's hurting. I'm sorry he wasn't ready. I'm sorry the board process doesn't align with his self-perception. But I'm not sorry for doing my job. He says you tanked him on purpose. He's wrong. My whole family thinks your whole family has spent years watching him disrespect me and saying nothing. Forgive me if I'm not particularly concerned with their current opinions. Silence on the line. Then, quietly, I don't know how to fix this. Maybe it's not yours to fix. We hung up without resolution. I turned off my phone, sat in my quiet office, and felt the weight of consequences settling around me like snow. That evening, I got an email from Mark. Subject line, explanation requested. I almost deleted it without reading. But curiosity, or maybe some vestigial sense of family obligation, made me open it. Captain Shanks, I received notification today that my OTS application was not recommended. As you are on the board and our family, I believe I'm entitled to know what you said about me. This feels personal, and I need to understand what happened. I stared at the email for a long time. Then I wrote back, Sergeant Shanks, board proceedings are confidential. I cannot and will not discuss the specific deliberations or recommendations. What I can tell you is that every candidate was evaluated by the same standard, using the same criteria, by 5 independent senior officers. Your interview responses and demonstrated leadership philosophy were assessed relative to OTS requirements. I recommend you speak with your chain of command about developmental opportunities that might strengthen a future application. Respectfully, Captain Shanks. Professional. Distant. Offering nothing that could be twisted into proof of bias. I hit send and closed my computer. The fallout continued for days. Ethan's family stopped calling me directly and started calling him instead, creating pressure that he brought home like bad weather. He tried to remain neutral, tried to see both sides, but I could feel him bending toward his family's narrative that I'd been cruel, vindictive, unprofessional. I wasn't there, I told him one night when he pressed me again to explain what happened. You weren't there. For other senior officers were. They all saw the same things I saw. This isn't about family history. It's about whether he demonstrated officer potential. He didn't. You're so cold about this. I'm professional about this. There's a difference. But he didn't see the difference, and I was too exhausted to teach it to him. 3 weeks after the notification, I got a message from Mark. Just 2 sentences. Congrats on the promotion recommendation I heard about. Guess you got what you wanted. I hadn't told anyone outside work about my upcoming promotion to major. Someone in his network must have mentioned it. The timing looked damning, him denied, me elevated. But correlation wasn't causation, and I refused to apologize for success. I didn't respond to his message. Christmas came like an obligation. Ethan's family made it clear I wasn't welcome at their gathering. Ethan went alone, came back quiet and troubled. They asked me to choose, he said. Between you and them. My heart clenched. And? I told them there was no choice. You're my wife. But? He looked at me with exhausted eyes. But I don't know how to live with this distance. They're my family. So am I. It's different. Maybe it was. Or maybe it just felt different because blood relationships came with an assumption of permanence that marriage had to prove daily. We spent Christmas alone, quietly, both of us aware that something between us was fracturing. By January, I'd accepted the promotion to major. New oak leaves on my collar, new responsibilities, same commitment to doing the job right regardless of cost. Mark transferred units in March, whether by choice or necessity, I never knew. The family gossip network that had once looped me in now excluded me entirely. Ethan and I went to counseling. It helped some. But there were fault lines now, places where we stepped carefully to avoid collapse. Do you regret it? The counselor asked me once. Regret what? Being on that board. Making that evaluation. I thought about it honestly. No. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that years of disrespect led to a moment where I had to choose between family peace and professional integrity. But the choice itself? No. I don't regret choosing integrity. Ethan listened, nodded, but I could see him calculating costs differently than I did. For him, family harmony was worth compromise. For me, self-respect wasn't negotiable. We were both right. We were both losing. The months blurred into routine, work, home, careful conversations, small reconnections, and quiet distances. I poured myself into my new role as major, leading with the same principles I'd tried to evaluate in others: service, humility, developmental leadership. And slowly, surprisingly, something shifted. I started receiving quiet messages from other women officers, thanking me for holding the line, for not bending standards to preserve comfort. I became known as someone who took integrity seriously, who would evaluate fairly even when it cost personally. Your reputation is solid, Colonel Rhodes told me at my promotion ceremony. You're building something important, credibility that can't be shaken by politics or personality. It's exhausting. The best things usually are. Mark's name came up occasionally in joint service circles. He was working under a young lieutenant now, I heard. Quieter than before. Learning, maybe. Or just biding time. I didn't seek updates. Didn't track his progress. His journey was his own. Mine continued forward, steady, principled, expensive in ways that showed only in private moments when I wondered what family might have looked like if respect had been mutual from the start. But wondering didn't change anything. So I just kept moving, kept leading, kept proving that dignity wasn't something you surrendered for approval. 1 year after the board decision, on a Tuesday that felt like any other, I was preparing for a staff meeting when my office phone rang. Major Shanks, I answered. Ma'am, this is Sergeant Kowalski from the Joint Admin Office. I have a message for you from TSGT Mark Shanks, Army. He's requesting permission to meet with you regarding his second OTS application. Says you offered guidance in your last communication. I pulled up my sent emails, found the message I'd sent him a year ago. Recommend you speak with your chain of command about developmental opportunities that might strengthen a future application. Does he have his commander's approval for this meeting? Yes, ma'am. Says he's going through official channels this time. I thought about it. Weighed the costs and possibilities. I'll meet with him. But it needs to be on base, during duty hours, and documented. I want a colleague present as witness. Understood, ma'am. I'll coordinate. I hung up, stared at the phone, and wondered if people really could change, or if we just got better at hiding our worst impulses. I guess I was about to find out. I stood at my desk that Tuesday morning, adjusting the silver bars on my Air Force Service dress uniform. Captain Amelia Shanks, 03, 29 years old, already tired of explaining myself to people who should know better. Outside my office window at Peterson Air Force Base, the Colorado sky stretched clean and blue, the kind of morning that made you forget half your life was spent justifying your authority. My husband Ethan understood, mostly. He'd grown up military adjacent, knew the language, respected the structure. But his brother Mark, that was different. Mark Shanks was 31, a technical sergeant in the Army, E6. He'd enlisted at 18, worked his way up through sheer determination and charisma that made people overlook his rough edges. At family dinners, he was the center of attention. Loud, confident, quick with a joke. The kind of man who filled a room and expected everyone to adjust. I'd met him at our engagement party 7 years ago. He'd shaken my hand too hard and said, "So you're the one stealing my little brother into officer country." Everyone laughed. I smiled and let it go. That was my first mistake, thinking it was harmless. The early years were manageable. We saw him at holidays, maybe twice a year. But then his wife Anna got pregnant, and family became more central. More visits, more opportunities for small frictions to accumulate. When Anna struggled with medical paperwork during her high-risk pregnancy, I walked her through every form, every office. When their daughter Emily applied for college scholarships, I spent a weekend helping her sharpen her essay. She got the scholarship. Anna sent flowers. Mark sent a text. No mention of any of it at Thanksgiving. But when someone asked Emily about her scholarship, Mark jumped in with the story, framing it as if he'd been the one to guide her. I watched him rewrite the narrative in real time, and I understood something fundamental. Mark needed to be the hero of every story. I was just furniture in his version. At work, my authority was unquestioned. I led 30 airmen, managed multi-million-dollar operations, briefed colonels and generals without hesitation. But at Shank's family gatherings, I was Captain Fancy. Mark's nickname, delivered with a grin that dared me to take offense. Desk General became another favorite. At a summer cookout, he mock saluted me in front of Ethan's parents. "Permission to grab another beer, ma'am?" Everyone laughed. Even Ethan, though his laugh was uncomfortable. I excused myself, went inside, and stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. 30 years old, wearing a sundress and pretending not to care that my brother-in-law had just reduced my rank to a punchline. His family would always choose Mark's comfort over my dignity. Not because they were cruel, but because maintaining peace was easier than confronting imbalance. The shift happened when Mark started talking about commissioning. Officer training school. Becoming a lieutenant. Applied for OTS last month, he announced at a birthday dinner. "Guess I'll outrank you soon enough, Captain Fancy." The table went quiet for half a heartbeat. Then Ethan's father laughed, and conversation resumed. The teasing escalated. At a 4th of July barbecue, Mark emphasized Desk General every time he addressed me. His mentor, Major Dan Lively, fed his ego and dismissed academic officers. Subtle disrespect became open condescension. Mark posted on social media constantly photos in uniform, captions about "Officer Country, here I come." Then came Thanksgiving. Mark, emboldened by drinks, performed a mock salute. "Yes, ma'am, Captain Amelia, reporting for dish duty." Laughter erupted. Even Ethan chuckled awkwardly. My silence held the room, calm, composed, but humiliated. I excused myself early. Later, I learned through colleagues that Mark's promotion packet was under review for OTS, and that I was sitting on the evaluation board next quarter. No favoritism, no revenge, I was a professional. But fate had an impeccable sense of irony. Only my mentor, Colonel Rhodes, knew the connection. The review board day arrived. I entered the room in full service blues. Mark walked in smiling until he saw me seated at the center desk with the other senior officers. Silence. The oxygen left the room. He stammered, "Ma'am," and saluted awkwardly. "At ease, Sergeant Shanks," I said, expression neutral. The interview proceeded. I didn't speak much, protocol required impartiality, but my questions were sharp, fair, professional. When I asked about his leadership philosophy, he listed qualities that benefit the leader: competence, confidence, decisiveness. "What about service?" I asked. "What do you owe the people under your command?" His jaw tightened. He knew I wasn't just asking about leadership theory. "Both," he said finally. "The rank demands respect, but the person earns it. And if those two things come into conflict, then the person needs to prove themselves worthy of the rank." His answers faltered throughout. Confidence drained. The other officers noted inconsistencies in his leadership statements. He couldn't articulate what he owed those he led, only what they owed him. He showed no intellectual humility, no understanding of developmental leadership. Afterward, the board convened privately. I recused myself for objectivity, but the outcome was unanimous: not recommended for OTS this cycle. The reason? Demonstrated lack of humility and emotional intelligence. I signed the report with calm hands, steady breath. News spread quickly. Mark's confidence collapsed. His tone at family gatherings changed, quieter, subdued. No more jokes. Ethan's family blamed me. Phone calls came: his mother, Anna, his father, all asking how I could do this. I let them go to voicemail. He says you tanked him on purpose, Ethan told me. He's wrong. My whole family thinks your whole family has spent years watching him disrespect me and saying nothing. Forgive me if I'm not particularly concerned with their current opinions. Mark sent an email. Subject line, explanation requested. I wrote back professionally, offering nothing that could be twisted into proof of bias. He replied with bitterness. I didn't respond. Christmas came. Ethan's family made clear I wasn't welcome. Ethan went alone. They asked me to choose, he said when he returned. Between you and them. And? I told them there was no choice. You're my wife. He looked exhausted. But I don't know how to live with this distance. A year passed. Then Mark requested a meeting, through proper channels this time, seeking guidance for his second OTS application. I agreed, with Major Brennan present as witness. When Mark arrived at 1400 hours, he looked different. Older, less aggressive. Why are you reapplying? I asked. He was quiet, gathering thoughts. After the first board, I was angry. But my commander made me look at my interview responses. And I realized I didn't actually understand what being an officer meant. I thought it was about authority. About rank. But it's not. What is it about? Service. Responsibility to the people you lead, not just the mission. I had that backward. He told me about his current supervisor, Lieutenant Garrett, 26 and brand new. When she'd first shown up, he'd been disrespectful. But she'd asked him to mentor her, admitted she didn't know things, then gave him credit in front of her commander. She made me part of her success instead of threatened by my experience, he said. And that taught you what? That officers who know how to lead don't need to prove it constantly. They make the people around them better. It was a better answer than anything he'd said in the first interview. We continued for 30 minutes. His answers weren't flawless, but he was trying, genuinely engaging instead of performing confidence. What do you want from me specifically? I asked finally. Honest feedback, ma'am. Where are my gaps? I considered him across the table. Thought about years of disrespect, about Thanksgiving dinner and mock salutes. And I thought about the possibility that people could learn, could grow. You need to develop intellectual humility, I said. Officers need to be comfortable saying, I don't know, and what do you think? Your instinct is still to have the answer. That's NCO thinking. Officer thinking is about developing other people's authority. Then he asked, did I make this harder by being family? Yes, but not in the way you think. It made it harder because I had to work twice as hard to be objective. Your interview performance made my job easier. Actually, the gaps were obvious enough that any board would have seen them. I thought you tanked me on purpose. I know. But you were wrong. He nodded slowly. I owe you an apology. I treated your rank like a joke for years. I was threatened by your success and disguised it as humor. I was wrong. The apology landed between us, genuine and too late all at once. I appreciate you saying that, I managed. But this meeting is about your development, not our history. The months rolled forward. Mark reached out quarterly with updates. His second OTS application went to a different board. I'd been rotated off, promoted to lieutenant colonel. I heard he'd done well, that the board recommended him with strong endorsements. He graduated OTS 6 months later. I sent a card, simple, professional, acknowledging his achievement without pretending our history was simple. My marriage to Ethan strengthened in some ways, remained fractured in others. Some relationships heal. Others just scar over enough to function. I made lieutenant colonel at 39, right on schedule. Mark and I eventually achieved something like mutual respect, professional, distant, but real. Present day. I sit at my desk, lieutenant colonel now, 40 years old, looking out at snow-capped mountains. There's a flight assignment on my desk, 6 months deployed. Tomorrow I leave. Mark and I email occasionally now. His unit says he's doing well as a lieutenant, that he's developed into a thoughtful leader. Emily calls me Aunt Amelia and means it without complexity. Anna apologized last year, finally. I think about that Thanksgiving dinner sometimes, the mock salute, the laughter, the humiliation that crystallized into resolve. I think about the board interview where consequences arrived, not because I engineered them, but because I simply refused to deflect them. Some lessons don't need revenge, I'd told Colonel Rhodes once. They just need time, rank, and memory. People ask me sometimes, younger officers, women navigating similar dynamics, how I handled it. I tell them, you do the job. You show up, follow protocol, apply standards consistently. You trust that professionalism will protect you from accusations of bias, that integrity compounds over time. I've paid in strained relationships, in family dinners I'll never attend, in a brother-in-law who'll always be complicated rather than close. But I've also earned something that can't be taken: credibility. Respect that isn't contingent on being likable. Authority that comes from demonstrated judgment rather than demanded compliance. I stand, adjust my uniform in the mirror. The silver oak leaves catch light. Lieutenant Colonel. Oh, 5. But the progression isn't about age or rank. It's about the distance between who I was at that Thanksgiving dinner and who I am now. The distance between accepting disrespect and setting boundaries. Mark used to mock the rank. Called me Captain Fancy, desk general, made my authority into a costume he could dismiss. Now he salutes it. Not because I demanded he respect it, but because he finally understands what it represents. Years of earned authority, consistent principle, the courage to hold standards even when it costs personally. I didn't destroy Mark's career. I just refused to prop it up when his own choices undermined it. I didn't engineer consequences. I just stopped deflecting them. And that simple act of stepping aside and letting truth land where it belonged changed everything. Not because I was vindictive. Because I was finally done being smaller than my uniform required. The rank is just fabric and metal. The authority is built from thousands of small moments where you choose integrity over comfort. Mark understands that now. It took a board rejection, a year of humbling work, and a slow rebuild of his understanding of leadership. I put on my cover, turn off the office light, and walk toward whatever comes next. The rank on my collar isn't costume jewelry anymore. It never was. Some people just needed time to see it clearly. And some people needed consequences to teach them how to look. Here's where I'll leave it. I chose standards over comfort and lived with the fallout. If you've been there, I want to hear from you. Before you go, drop your city in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries and respect. Questions for you. Have you ever had to enforce a boundary with family and stick to it? What did respect look like for you? Earned, demanded, or both? If you were in my seat at that board, what would you have done? What's one line you won't let anyone cross again, and why?